The Galactic Dominion had ruled over the Orion Arm for over 1,000 years. Their fleets of sleek, silver warships moved through the void like reapers, harvesting planets and civilizations that dared to resist. No species had ever stood against them for long. Those who tried were crushed, their homeworlds reduced to ash, their names erased from history. It was an unbreakable truth. The Dominion always won. That truth shattered the day humanity arrived. The war had raged for decades between the Dominion and the coalition of free worlds, a fragile alliance of lesser species struggling to push back against their oppressors. They fought bravely, but without hope. Every battle was a slow, agonizing defeat. The Dominion had more ships, better weapons, and a will forged through centuries of absolute control. The coalition had courage, but courage alone could not hold the line. Then, without warning, a new signal entered the battlefield. It was an unknown vessel, emerging from the dark of uncharted space like a phantom. Every Dominion sensor, every scanner, every ship picked up the presence of something unthinkable. A single warship. But it wasn't like any ship they had ever seen. It was massive, brutal in its design, built for war, not elegance. Its thick, armored hull was scarred from battles fought elsewhere, its weapons primed with a confidence that defied all logic. The hull bore an unfamiliar insignia, a blue sphere crossed by white lines, and across the metal in bold, defiant letters was a name that sent a ripple of unease through the Dominion's ranks. UES Retribution. The Dominion fleet, confident as ever, sent a warning. An offer of surrender. An ultimatum. The newcomers did not reply. Instead, the warship moved. The Dominion's battlecruisers adjusted formation, preparing for what they assumed would be a desperate and suicidal charge. But the humans didn't charge. They didn't evade. They simply fired. A single volley of kinetic slugs left the Retribution's forward railguns, and a Dominion battleship, one of their strongest, ceased to exist. Shields, armor, hull, all gone in an instant. The ship didn't explode. It was torn apart, shattered into pieces by sheer force. The Dominion officers, so used to watching enemies struggle helplessly against their superior firepower, stared in stunned disbelief. This was impossible. No weapon should be capable of doing this. The coalition forces, battered and outgunned, watched in equal disbelief. But their disbelief turned to hope as the Retribution fired again. And again. Each shot was death. Each blast was final. The Dominion fleet panicked. Orders were shouted. Formations crumbled. They had never faced an enemy like this. An enemy that did not fear them, did not hesitate, did not even acknowledge their supposed superiority. The humans had come not to fight a desperate war, but to win. Across the coalition fleet, transmissions burst to life. Who are you?" a desperate coalition admiral asked. A response came, cold and certain. "We are humanity." And with those words, the balance of power in the galaxy shifted forever. The Dominion had ruled for 1,000 years. But against the Retribution, against the species that had survived its own wars, its own self-destruction, and still risen stronger. The Dominion had finally met an enemy it could not conquer. The Dominion fleet, once an unbreakable wall of conquest, had never known true fear. Their empire had crushed 1,000 civilizations, and no species had ever inflicted real losses upon them. Their war doctrine was simple: overwhelm, dominate, and erase. But as the UES Retribution moved through the battlefield, turning their mightiest warships into wreckage, a terrifying realization spread among the Dominion commanders. They were not fighting desperate rebels or scattered resistance forces anymore. They were fighting something far worse. They were fighting humans. Panic spread through the Dominion fleet like wildfire. The retribution was unlike anything they had ever encountered. It did not use energy weapons like their ships. It did not rely on shields or plasma-based cannons. No, this warship was something else entirely. A predator built for destruction. Every shot it fired was lethal. Dominion battleships, each the size of floating cities, were torn apart in seconds. The Retribution's railguns fired with terrifying precision, sending hypersonic slugs through entire formations of enemy ships. Their vaunted energy shields, designed to withstand plasma bombardments and laser barrages, were useless against the sheer brute force of mass-driven projectiles. The Dominion's High Admiral, commanding the battle from the bridge of his flagship Glorious Ascendancy, could barely comprehend what was happening. His long fingers gripped the edges of his console, his reptilian eyes darting between the rapidly depleting fleet readouts. Entire squadrons were vanishing from the sensors in real time. Impossible, he muttered under his breath. The communications officers were already screaming reports of lost ships, of panicked officers requesting retreat orders. The Dominion fleet had never been on the receiving end of such overwhelming destruction. "Transmit an offer for surrender," the High Admiral snapped. "If they are rational, they will—" "They're firing again!" a lieutenant screamed. The Retribution's spinal-mounted railgun charged. A soundless hum spread through the vacuum of space as the ship adjusted its aim, targeting the Glorious Ascendancy itself. The High Admiral barely had time to react before the slug was fired. Unlike Dominion weapons, which relied on energy and plasma, this was a solid projectile. A 20-meter-long tungsten rod accelerated to near-light speed. It struck the Glorious Ascendancy at its core, and punched straight through. For a brief, terrible moment, there was silence. Then, the Dominion's flagship began to split apart. The kinetic force of the impact tore through the vessel, cracking it open like an egg. Fires burst from its innards as its artificial atmosphere vented violently into space. The ship's engines flickered, sputtered, then exploded in a blinding flash. The High Admiral did not even have time to scream. The Dominion fleet, once the terror of the galaxy, watched in horror as their flagship, the very symbol of their dominance, was obliterated in a single shot. That was the moment their discipline shattered. Ships broke formation. Some turned and fled, jumping into hyperspace without waiting for orders. Others tried to fight, firing wildly at the Retribution, but their weapons barely scratched its armor. And then, the humans spoke again. "This is your only warning. Surrender or be erased." It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a fact. The Dominion had never encountered an enemy like this. The humans did not fight for survival. They did not fight for revenge. They fought for total victory. And as the remains of the Dominion fleet scattered into the darkness, one truth became clear. The age of Dominion rule was over. The age of humanity had begun. The remnants of the Dominion fleet scattered in every direction, their sleek warships vanishing into hyperspace like frightened prey, fleeing a relentless predator. On board the UES Retribution, Captain Elias Graves watched the enemy retreat in silence. The bridge was quiet, save for the hum of machinery and the faint murmurs of his crew monitoring the battlefield. The Dominion, once the unquestioned rulers of this part of the galaxy, had been broken in a single engagement. A communications officer turned from her console. "Captain, incoming transmission from the Coalition flagship." Graves nodded. "Put it through." The main screen flickered to life, revealing the haggard yet awe-struck face of Admiral Varric, the leader of the Coalition forces. Varric was an older Zilari, a species of avian-like beings who had fought against the Dominion for decades. His feathers, usually a bright emerald, were dulled with age and the weight of war. But now, for the first time in years, there was something new in his sharp eyes. Hope. Human, Varric said, his voice careful. You saved us. Graves leaned forward in his chair, his expression unreadable. We came because we heard your distress calls. Your war is our war now. Varric hesitated. Why? Why would you fight for us? We had no knowledge of your people, no alliance, no history. The human captain exhaled slowly, as if considering his words. Then he spoke with the weight of a species that had endured centuries of war, of suffering, of triumph. The Dominion made a mistake, Graves said. They thought they ruled this part of the galaxy unchallenged. They believed they were invincible, that no one could stand against them. He paused, his eyes cold. They were wrong. Varric glanced at the wreckage littering the battlefield, once mighty Dominion warships reduced to nothing but drifting debris. You could change everything. With technology like yours, with warships like the Retribution, the Dominion wouldn't stand a chance. Graves gave a slight nod. That's the idea. For a long moment, Varric simply stared at the screen, his feathers ruffling with emotion. Then, his beak curled into something resembling a smile. I never thought I'd live to see the Dominion run in fear. Graves leaned back in his chair. Get used to it. The bridge crew of the Retribution waited in silence. Then, from the Coalition fleet, a signal was transmitted, one that carried across the battlefield, reaching every surviving vessel still listening. A declaration. The war was no longer a struggle for survival. It was an offensive, the beginning of humanity's conquest. The news of the battle spread like wildfire across the stars. The Dominion, once unchallenged, had suffered defeat, and not just a minor setback, but a catastrophic loss that sent shockwaves through the galaxy. For the first time in 1,000 years, their enemies had not been crushed. They had fought back, and they had won. In the war-torn sectors of the Coalition, whispers became shouts. Despair turned into resolve. Entire fleets that had been on the verge of surrender now regrouped. Colonies that had been bracing for annihilation took up arms. The Dominion had always been seen as unstoppable. Now, they were vulnerable. And at the center of it all, a single name echoed across every communication channel, every war council, every desperate resistance cell. Humanity. On board the UES Retribution, Captain Elias Graves stood in the strategy room with Admiral Varric and the other Coalition leaders. A massive holographic display showed the star maps of the known galaxy. The Dominion's territories stretched across them like an unbreakable iron grip. But now there was a crack. The Dominion won't sit still after this, Varric said, his talons tapping against the table. They'll retaliate, and when they do, they'll come with everything they have. They always escalate, chimed in another Coalition commander, a reptilian Garshok general. They will want to make an example of us. Graves crossed his arms. Let them try. Varric gave him a sharp look. You don't understand the scale of what we're dealing with, human. You might have defeated one fleet, but the Dominion controls thousands of warships. Entire sectors are devoted to nothing but ship production. You can't win by brute force alone. Graves studied the map for a moment, then smiled. Who said anything about brute force? The room fell silent. Graves tapped on the holographic display, zooming into the Dominion's vast empire. He pointed to a specific system, one deep within enemy space. The Dominion wins because they control supply lines. They win because they dictate the terms of every battle. He looked up at the Coalition leaders. But what if we don't fight by their rules? The reptilian general narrowed his yellow eyes. What are you suggesting? A slow grin spread across Graves' face. We take the war to them. Varric's feathers bristled. You're proposing a counteroffensive? That's insanity. We barely survived this battle. We don't have the numbers. We don't need numbers. Graves interrupted. "We just need the right targets." He gestured to a few key points on the map. Shipyards, resource depots, communication hubs. The vital arteries that kept the Dominion's massive war machine running. "The Dominion has spent centuries fighting species that play by their rules," Graves said. "They expect resistance to fight defensively, to hold the line, to retreat when overwhelmed. But humans? We don't fight like that." His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "We hit them where it hurts. We cut them off. We make them bleed." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Varric let out a low chuckle. "You're insane." Graves smirked. "Probably." The reptilian general studied the display, then exhaled through his nostrils. "It's risky, it's reckless, and it might actually work." One by one, the coalition leaders nodded in agreement. Hope flickered in their expressions. Hope and something else. Ruthlessness. For the first time in this war, they weren't just trying to survive. They were preparing to win. The meeting ended with one simple declaration. A transmission that would be sent across every occupied world, every hidden resistance cell, every broken fleet still waiting in the shadows. A message that would shake the very foundation of the galaxy. The war has changed. Humanity has arrived, and the Dominion will fall. The Dominion's High Council convened in the heart of their empire, deep within the towering citadel on Prime World. The chamber was massive, its walls adorned with the relics of past conquests. Holographic banners displayed images of their countless victories. Worlds burned, fleets shattered, civilizations erased. Yet now, for the first time in centuries, those gathered at the highest seats of power were not here to gloat. They were here because of fear. At the head of the chamber, Supreme Chancellor Orvax rose from his throne-like chair, his deep golden scales shimmering under the dim light. His slitted eyes scanned the room, taking in the expressions of his fellow rulers, unease, confusion, and in some, outright panic. "This is unacceptable," Orvax growled, his voice echoing through the chamber. "An unknown species annihilates one of our fleets, destroys our High Admiral, and scatters our forces like vermin, and none of you have answers." A Dominion War Minister, his face lined with the ridges of age and experience, cleared his throat. "Chancellor, we are still gathering intelligence. These humans appeared from nowhere. Their technology is crude, yet somehow devastatingly effective. Their warship, the Retribution, does not follow conventional designs." "Then study it!" Orvax slammed his clawed hand against the table. "Dissect their tactics. We do not lose battles. We do not lose wars." A more cautious voice, one of the Empire's intelligence heads, spoke next. "Chancellor, we must consider the implications. If this single ship inflicted such damage, it is possible the humans have more. We have no records of them in our archives. No known colonies, no history of diplomatic contact." He paused. "And yet, they fight with the precision of a species born for war." Orvax exhaled slowly. "Then we must erase them before they spread." A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber. The Dominion did not tolerate challengers. They would not allow a new power to rise and threaten their control. Orvax turned to his fleet commander. "Mobilize the Grand Armada. Not just a detachment, everything. If these humans want war, we will bring them extinction." Far from the Dominion's seat of power, in a darkened war room aboard the UES Retribution, Captain Elias Graves and the coalition leaders studied their next moves. The battle had been won, but the real war was just beginning. "You know they're coming for us," Admiral Varric said. "The Dominion does not take humiliation lightly. They will bring everything to our doorstep." Graves nodded. "That's exactly what we want." Varric tilted his head, his feathers twitching in confusion. "You want to fight their entire armada?" "No," Graves said. "I want them to think we're going to fight their armada." He brought up the holographic map of Dominion space, highlighting key supply lines and communication hubs. They're expecting us to defend, but we won't. We'll attack where they least expect it. We'll cut their supply lines, disrupt their movements, make their empire bleed. The reptilian Garshok general grinned, his sharp teeth glinting under the dim light. Guerrilla warfare on a galactic scale. Graves smirked. Exactly. Varric exhaled. And what happens when the Dominion realizes what we're doing? When they send their entire armada against us? Graves's expression darkened. Then we show them what happens when you push humanity too far. The war had changed. The Dominion believed itself invincible, but it had never faced an enemy like humanity, and soon the galaxy would learn the cost of underestimating Earth's fury. Across the stars, the Dominion's vast war machine began to move. Fleets that had once patrolled their borders in casual arrogance were now being recalled and rearmed. Warships the size of cities emerged from hidden shipyards, their hulls glistening with fresh armor. Battlecruisers, dreadnoughts, and entire planet-cracking siege fleets gathered in formation. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Dominion was preparing for a total war. And their target? Humanity. But where was humanity? That question haunted the Dominion's admirals as they swept across the battlefield. They expected a desperate coalition force to dig in, to hold defensive lines, to cower behind shields. That was what every species had done before. But there were no lines, no fortifications. Instead, there were whispers. A Dominion fuel depot in the Zevran sector was reduced to slag, its reactors sabotaged before the fleet could even arrive. A shipyard responsible for churning out warships for the Dominion's Grand Armada was destroyed overnight, its entire orbital structure turned into a spinning field of debris. A communication relay deep within Dominion space went silent, its technicians found dead, its encryption codes stolen. It was death by 1,000 cuts, attacks from the shadows, strikes that crippled the spine of the Empire. And at the heart of it all, one name echoed through Dominion space like a nightmare: the UES Retribution. On board the warship, Captain Elias Graves sat at the center of his bridge, his expression unreadable. The holographic displays before him showed reports of the chaos they had sown. The Dominion was flailing. They were chasing ghosts. It was working. They're pulling ships away from the front lines, Varric said, scanning the reports. Their admirals are confused. They don't know where to commit their forces. Graves nodded. They're used to fighting enemies who play by their rules. We don't. He turned to his officers. Prepare the next strike. Target? His weapons officer asked. Graves's eyes narrowed. Their home world. The bridge fell silent. Even Varric, hardened by decades of war, twitched his feathers in shock. You can't be serious. Graves folded his arms. Why not? Varric scoffed. Because it's suicide. Primeworld is the most heavily fortified planet in the galaxy. Their entire fleet will be there. Their defenses are meant to stop an invasion, Graves interrupted. We're not invading. The coalition leaders stared at him. What are we doing then? The reptilian general asked. Graves's expression turned cold. We're sending a message. Deep within Dominion space, Primeworld, the beating heart of the Empire, shimmered beneath its protective fleet. For centuries, no enemy had dared to approach its orbit. That changed in an instant. From the void, a single human warship emerged, UES Retribution. It did not hail. It did not ask for peace. It fired. A single kinetic round was launched, not at military targets, not at fortresses, but at the Imperial Palace itself. The projectile struck the outer walls, carving a deep scar across the very symbol of Dominion rule. The city below trembled, not from destruction, No civilians were harmed, but from shock. Then, as quickly as it had arrived, the retribution vanished into hyperspace. No demands, no warnings, just a message, carved into the Dominion's very core. We can reach you. You are not safe. For the first time in history, the rulers of the Dominion felt fear. The Dominion's High Council stood in stunned silence. A single human warship had breached their defenses. It had reached Prime World, and worse, it hadn't come to destroy. It hadn't even attempted a serious attack. It had sent a message, a cold, calculated warning. We can reach you. You are not safe. Supreme Chancellor Orvax sat at the head of the chamber, his golden scales trembling with barely contained rage. His claws dug into the armrests of his throne as his advisors and admirals argued in panic. "This is an outrage," a war minister shouted. "Our fleets were stationed at Prime World. Where were our defenses?" "Their ship was too fast," an admiral growled. "It arrived and disappeared before we could react. This is not conventional warfare. This is terrorism." "Terrorism!" Orvax spat, his slit-pupiled eyes burning with fury. This is humiliation." The silence that followed was chilling. Every Dominion world had watched as their untouchable capital had been violated. The greatest empire in the galaxy had been mocked, its rulers desecrated, and they could do nothing. Orvax stood slowly, his golden robes flowing behind him as he stepped forward. "Enough," he said, his voice low and venomous. "We are the Dominion. We do not cower. We do not retreat." He turned his gaze to the assembled admirals. "Mobilize every available fleet. Every single one." His voice was a razor's edge. "I want every Dominion warship hunting these humans and their coalition pets. I want their colonies burned. I want their species erased from history." The admirals nodded, their faces grim. Orvax's eyes glowed with hatred. "They have given us their message." He bared his fangs. "Now, we will deliver ours." Across the galaxy, the hunt for humanity began. The Dominion's war machine roared to life, its vast fleets moving with a single goal: annihilation. Worlds were put under martial law. Every border, every sector was flooded with Dominion warships. Dozens of planets burned under their wrath as they sought retribution. Entire species were punished simply for sheltering the phantoms that had struck Prime World. But no matter how many fleets they sent, no matter how many planets they raised, they never found the retribution. Because the humans were already 3 steps ahead. On board the UES Retribution, Captain Elias Graves watched the reports in silence. The Dominion had done exactly what he wanted. "They're reacting," Varric muttered. "They're panicking." Graves nodded. "Which means they're making mistakes." He turned to his officers. "Begin Phase 2. His weapons officer hesitated. "Sir, if we move now, there's no going back." Graves's eyes were cold. "Good." The next strike wouldn't be a warning. The next strike would be the beginning of the end. The Dominion was a beast in its death throes, thrashing wildly across the galaxy in search of its unseen enemy. It was used to fighting wars of conquest, of overwhelming its foes with sheer numbers, of crushing resistance before it could even begin. But now it was fighting shadows. The Dominion's mighty fleets surged into one star system after another, but the enemy was never there. Instead, they found only ruins, shipyards sabotaged, fuel depots in flames, hyperspace relays left in pieces. Every battle they expected to win had already been lost before they even arrived. And each time, carved into the wreckage, scrawled onto shattered hulls, broadcast on Dominion emergency frequencies, was the same message: retribution is coming. Deep within the UES Retribution, Captain Elias Graves stood in the dim glow of the war table, his hands folded behind his back. The holographic display before him showed the enemy's movements: wild, undisciplined, desperate. "They're burning their own empire," Admiral Varric muttered, shaking his feathered head in disbelief. "They're turning their fleets against their own people in search of us." Graves didn't blink. Good. The coalition generals, gathered around the table, studied the latest reports. The Dominion had pulled hundreds of warships away from their primary battlefronts, leaving garrisons weak, colonies exposed. "The time has come," Graves said, zooming in on a specific point on the map. A single world, heavily fortified but now vulnerable. A world the Dominion could not afford to lose. Velronis Prime. The heart of the Dominion's war machine. The shipyard world. "This planet builds a third of the Dominion's warships," Graves continued. "If we take it out, they won't just be wounded. They'll be crippled." The reptilian Garshok general let out a slow, predatory grin. "Then let's break them." Graves nodded. "Prepare the fleet. We strike at dawn." Across the void, coalition and human warships assembled in secret, the largest combined fleet the Dominion had ever faced. Not a defensive force, not a desperate resistance, an offensive. For the first time in history, the Dominion was about to be invaded. Velronis Prime had never been attacked. Its defense platforms, orbital cannons, and planetary shields were said to be impenetrable. They had been built to stop an invasion. But humanity wasn't invading. They were here to destroy. The assault began with a single shot. The UES Retribution emerged from hyperspace in high orbit, moving faster than any Dominion warship could track. Its spinal-mounted railgun fired once. The projectile tore through Velronis Prime's primary defense station, turning it into a cloud of molten slag before the Dominion even realized what had happened. Before they could react, the full coalition fleet arrived. Hundreds of warships, fighters and bombers swarmed, capital ships unleashed hellfire, and ground forces launched in high-speed drop pods. Velronis Prime burned. The Dominion's shipyards, which had fed their war machine for centuries, collapsed in a single night. And as the world fell into ruin, the Dominion finally understood. This wasn't just a war, this was their extinction. The fall of Velronis Prime was not just a battle, it was a death sentence. The Dominion had spent centuries believing in its invincibility, but now the heart of its war machine lay in flames. Shipyards that had once churned out fleets by the thousands were reduced to molten wreckage. Supply depots exploded in chains of fire, and orbital defense platforms crumbled before they could even mount a proper defense. For the first time in its history, the Dominion faced something it had never even considered possible. A superior enemy. From orbit, Captain Elias Graves watched as the once mighty planet burned. Coalition warships moved in precise formations, eradicating any resistance that remained. The Dominion garrison had collapsed within hours. Their leaders had either fled, surrendered, or died screaming. The battle had been won. But the war wasn't over. On the bridge of the UES Retribution, Graves stood before the holographic display, watching the Dominion's strategic collapse unfold. His officers exchanged grim looks as the latest intelligence reports scrolled across the screen. Admiral Varric spoke first. "The Dominion is withdrawing forces from the outer territories. Their commanders are trying to consolidate power around their core worlds." Graves nodded. "They're desperate." The Garshok general let out a low growl of satisfaction. "They should be. This empire is dying, and they know it." Varric's feathers ruffled. "And that's what makes them dangerous. The Dominion will not surrender, Captain. They will fight until their last breath." Graves exhaled. "Then we take that breath away." He turned toward the fleet command table, bringing up a new target. One even bigger than Velronis Prime. Prime World, the Dominion's throne world, the very heart of their empire. Silence filled the bridge. The idea was madness. No species had ever attempted a direct assault on Prime World. It was the untouchable seat of Dominion rule. But then again, the Dominion had thought Velronis Prime was untouchable too. A slow, knowing grin spread across Graves's face. We finish this. We end them. Varric took a deep breath, then nodded. We've come this far. Let's kill the beast. Across the fleet, orders were given. Weapons were primed. Ships were readied for the final war. The Coalition wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for total victory. And soon, the Dominion would learn one final, terrible truth. Humanity doesn't start wars. It finishes them. The Dominion had always believed itself to be eternal. It had survived insurrections, crushed entire species, and rewritten the history of the stars to place itself at the center of all things. But as its fleets crumbled, as its mighty war machine failed, as its enemies closed in, the truth became undeniable. The Dominion was dying, and humanity was coming to deliver the final blow. The largest armada in galactic history gathered at the edge of Dominion space. Human warships, brutal, angular, built for war, moved alongside Coalition vessels of every shape and size. Old rivalries were forgotten. Old wounds ignored. Every species that had suffered beneath the Dominion's rule now stood as one. At the heart of the fleet, leading the charge, was the UES Retribution. On its bridge, Captain Elias Graves studied the final target. Prime World, the Dominion's capital, the beating heart of their empire. Varric stood beside him, eyes locked on the tactical display. Scans show massive fleet formations around the planet. Their defenses are at full strength. Graves nodded. They know we're coming. The Garshok general let out a deep, guttural laugh. Good. Let them prepare. It won't save them. A comms officer turned from her station. Incoming transmission from Prime World. Graves smirked. Put it through. The screen flickered to life. Supreme Chancellor Orvax appeared, his golden scales dimmed by stress, his once proud posture slouched with exhaustion. But his hatred was still there. You think you have won, human? Orvax hissed. You think this pathetic rebellion will last? Graves folded his arms. I think your empire is dead. You just haven't accepted it yet. Orvax's pupils contracted to slits. The Dominion will never fall. We will burn every star before we surrender. Graves nodded. Yeah, that's what I thought you'd say. He cut the transmission. Then, to his crew, he gave a single order. All ships, advance. The Battle of Prime World began with fire. The Dominion's last fleet threw everything they had into the fight. Massive dreadnoughts rained plasma from the skies. Their best warriors, their most ruthless commanders, their entire remaining strength poured into the void. But they weren't fighting desperate rebels anymore. They were fighting humanity. And humanity had come to finish the war. The Retribution led the charge, its railguns tearing through Dominion warships like they were paper. Coalition strike teams punched through planetary defenses, landing on Prime World itself. One by one, the Dominion's last strongholds fell, until at last there was only one place left. The Imperial Citadel, the very seat of Dominion power. The halls of the Citadel shook with the sound of approaching footsteps. Orvax stood at the center of the chamber, surrounded by his remaining guards. He gripped the ceremonial blade at his hip, his mind racing. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. The doors burst open, and through them stepped humans, not diplomats, not rebels, soldiers. At the front of them, his weapon raised, was Elias Graves. For a long moment, the two leaders stared at each other. Then Graves spoke. The war is over. Orvax bared his fangs. Never! He lunged. Graves didn't hesitate. One shot. The Supreme Chancellor of the Dominion collapsed, the last ruler of a dying empire, falling to a single bullet. The final symbol of Dominion power lay dead at humanity's feet. Across the stars, the news spread faster than light. The Dominion had fallen. A species that had once ruled without question had been broken. Not by some ancient prophecy, not by fate, by humanity. The war was over. But the legend of humanity's arrival had only just begun. The alien armada hovered in the darkness of space, their warships forming an unbreakable wall between Earth and the stars. They had waited for a response, for the humans to send a fleet to defend their world. But nothing came. No massive war machines, no desperate counterattack. Just silence. High Commander Zal Vorek of the Zortharian Dominion studied the holographic display of Earth. His people had conquered hundreds of worlds, and every species followed the same predictable pattern. They resisted, they sent their fleets, and they lost. It was a cycle as old as war itself. But the humans? They were an anomaly. High Commander, our scans confirm no large-scale mobilization, reported his second-in-command, a lean, green-skinned officer named Torvek. Their planetary defenses are minimal. Their fleet is scattered across distant sectors. This planet should already be under our control. Zalvorek nodded, his mandibles clicking in thought. Perhaps they surrender without a fight. Perhaps they know resistance is futile. Still, something felt wrong. The humans were not known for surrendering. If the reports were true, they were a violent, chaotic species that fought even when defeat was certain. So why were they silent? Then, the alert came. High Commander, a single vessel has exited slipspace at the edge of our formation. A single ship? Zalvorek frowned. Show me. On the main screen, a lone human vessel drifted into view. It was a strange, outdated thing, smaller than even the Zortharian corvettes. Its hull was patched and battle-worn, with clear signs of past damage. A relic from an older war, barely held together. Laughter spread through the Zortharian command deck. One ship? Torvek smirked. Is this a joke? An act of defiance? Zalvorek did not laugh. His instincts, honed by decades of war, screamed at him that something was off. Hail them, he ordered. A moment later the screen flickered, and the image of a human appeared. He was older, grizzled, with sharp, tired eyes, and a scar running down his cheek. He sat in the dimly lit cockpit of his battered ship, leaning forward like a predator waiting to strike. This is Captain Elias Kane of the Blackbird, the human said, his voice calm, almost amused. Looks like you were expecting an army. Sorry to disappoint. Zalvorek narrowed his eyes. You come alone? Kane smirked. Yeah, figured a fleet would be overkill. Laughter rang out again from the Zortharian crew. This human is mad, Torvek said, shaking his head. Shall I order his vessel destroyed? But Zalvorek hesitated. There was something unsettling about the human's confidence. What is your purpose here, Captain Kane? Kane leaned back in his chair. See, I read up on you guys. Every species you've conquered had one thing in common. They played by your rules. They sent their fleets, fought fair, tried to win a war of attrition. That's not really humanity's style. You believe you can stand against the might of the Dominion alone? Zalvorek asked, curiosity creeping into his voice. Kane chuckled. Not alone. But I'm not here to fight a war. I'm here to end one. Then, before Zalvorek could respond, every warning alarm on the Zortharian flagship erupted at once. High Commander! The human ship! It's... The screen glitched, static filling the air. The bridge shuddered as if reality itself had been torn open. The Blackbird, that tiny, outdated ship, had just triggered something massive, something unseen. Then, the stars themselves began to shift. The Zortharian flagship trembled, its massive hull groaning as if the very fabric of space had been twisted around it. High Commander Zal Vorek clutched the edge of his command chair, his mandibles clicking in alarm. "Status report," he barked. The bridge was in chaos. Officers scrambled to their stations, their sleek, green-skinned hands flying over control panels as screens flickered wildly. Torvek, his second-in-command, stared at the data streams with wide, disbelieving eyes. "Sir, some kind of spatial disruption, originating from the human ship." Zal Vorek's gaze snapped back to the screen. There, floating in the void, the Blackbird remained still. No weapons fired, no shields activated, just a single battered ship against an armada of warships. And yet, something was happening. "The gravitational field around us is shifting," another officer reported. "Energy readings spiking across the spectrum. He hesitated, his voice cracking with fear. "Sir, it's not coming from the human ship itself. It's using something else, something we can't see." Zal Vorek turned back to Kane, who was still on the communication screen. The human's smirk hadn't faded. "You feel that, Commander?" Kane asked, his voice dripping with amusement. "That's what happens when you pick a fight with someone who doesn't play by the rules." Zal Vorek's claws tightened into fists. "What have you done?" Kane shrugged. "See, your empire has conquered hundreds of civilizations, but they all had one thing in common. They thought war was about fleets, firepower, and strategy." His smile widened. "Humans, we don't fight wars, we end them." Before Zal Vorek could respond, the space around the Blackbird seemed to ripple, bending like the surface of a disturbed pond. Then, without warning, something huge emerged. It was impossible. A shadow darker than the void itself stretched across the battlefield, blotting out starlight. Zal Vorek's blood ran cold as he watched an unseen force manifest. Something vast, ancient, and utterly alien. The Zortharian flagship's sensors overloaded in an instant. The readings made no sense. It was there, but also wasn't. A structure without mass, a presence without form. The Dominion's technology had no way of measuring it, only feeling its sheer, crushing weight. Torvek's voice was barely a whisper. "By the ancestors. What is that?" Kane leaned forward in his seat, his voice calm. "That? That's something your kind never had to deal with before. See? The thing about humans? We've been playing with things we don't fully understand for centuries. The massive entity, whatever it was, shifted. Then, in a blink, the Zortharian warships around it began to vanish. Not explode, not flee, just gone." Zal Vorek watched in horror as entire battlecruisers, each one capable of razing cities, were simply erased from existence. No energy signatures, no debris, as if they had never been there at all. The bridge descended into pure panic. "High Commander, we're losing ships. They're just disappearing." Zal Vorek's claws dug into the armrests of his chair. "No, this is impossible. We are the Dominion. Then a sudden silence. Kane sighed. "You thought we'd send a fleet." He gestured lazily to the entity looming behind him. "We sent a warning." Zal Vorek couldn't breathe. The Dominion had conquered countless worlds, crushed rebellions, shattered fleets. Never had they encountered something like this. Never had one ship brought an armada to its knees. The realization settled into his bones. The humans hadn't come to fight. They had come to teach a lesson. And the Zortharian Dominion was learning it the hard way. Zal Vorek could feel his twin hearts pounding in his chest. His entire command bridge was in chaos. Officers shouting, alarms blaring, and the cold, crushing knowledge that the Dominion's greatest fleet was being unmade before his very eyes. And it was all because of one human ship. The Blackbird hadn't fired a single shot. It hadn't deployed any fighters. It hadn't even raised its shields. Yet something, some force, was answering its call. One by one, Zortharian warships continued to vanish. No explosions, no debris, just an empty void where they once existed. It was as if the universe itself had decided to erase them. Zalvorek's claws dug into his command chair as he turned back to the human on the screen. What have you done?" he demanded, his voice raw with fury and fear. Captain Kane just leaned back in his seat, arms crossed, that damnable smirk still on his face. "You ever hear about Schrodinger's cat, Commander?" Kane asked casually. "It's this old human thought experiment about something being both alive and dead at the same time. It's all about observation. Until you look, you don't know what's real." Zalvorek growled, his patience burning away. "What does that nonsense have to do with this?" He gestured wildly to the screen, displaying the destruction of his fleet. Kane chuckled. "Well, let's just say humanity took that idea and applied it to some interesting fields of research." His grin widened. "Turns out if you tinker with the right kind of physics, you can make an entire fleet exist in a state of maybe." Torvek, pale and trembling, turned to his commander. "Sir, I think—" He swallowed. "I think the human is using quantum uncertainty as a weapon." Zalvorek's breath caught. "Impossible." "Yeah," Kane said, as if reading his mind. "That's what we thought too. Then we started figuring out how to apply it. And now?" He nodded toward the disappearing warships. "Now your fleet is stuck in a Schrodinger's box of its own. It's not here. It's not gone. It's just undecided." A fresh wave of horror crashed over the command bridge. This was not conventional warfare. This was something else entirely. Zalvorek had fought in countless campaigns. He had seen species throw everything they had against the Dominion, from biological warfare to planet-destroying superweapons. Nothing had prepared him for this. "Call the retreat," Torvek whispered. His voice was barely audible over the alarms. "High Commander, if we stay here, we might all—" Then the flagship lurched. Every officer was thrown to the floor as the artificial gravity flickered. The lights dimmed. Zalvorek scrambled to his feet, his vision swimming. "Report!" he roared. A technician, barely holding himself upright, stared at his console in horror. "Sir, we're being pulled into the effect." Zalvorek turned back to Kane, desperation creeping into his voice. "This is madness." Kane gave a slow nod. "Yeah, probably. Do you understand what you're doing? This is genocide." Kane's smirk finally faded. "No," he said, his voice colder now. "Genocide is what your kind does. This is a message." Zalvorek's breath hitched. "A message?" "Yeah." Kane leaned in, his face filling the screen. "We're not like the others you've conquered. We don't fight fair. We don't play by your rules. And we sure as hell don't let people like you take what's ours." Zalvorek's claws trembled. The power dynamic had flipped entirely. He was the one pleading now. "End this," he growled. "Tell us what you want." Kane held up a single finger. "Simple. You go home. You tell your Dominion that Earth is off limits. You don't come back. Ever." Zalvorek hesitated. Was it even possible? Could the Dominion walk away from this humiliation? He thought of the ships that were already gone, the soldiers who had simply ceased to be. If he refused, how many more would disappear? Torvek looked at him, eyes filled with unspoken terror. Zalvorek exhaled slowly. "We will withdraw," he said, the words tasting like poison. "The Dominion will not return to this system." Kane nodded approvingly. "Smart choice, Commander." The Blackbird flickered on the screen, the massive entity behind it beginning to dissolve, fading back into the void like a nightmare slipping away from waking consciousness. One by one, the remaining Zortharian ships turned and vanished into slipspace. Zalvorek sat heavily in his chair, his body trembling. For the first time in his long, victorious career, he had been utterly defeated, and by one human ship. The silence that followed was unbearable. Zalvorek sat frozen in his command chair, his mind reeling. The impossible had happened. The greatest fleet in the Zortharian Dominion had been brought to its knees, not by overwhelming force, but by something far worse. The unknown. The Blackbird was still there, its small, unassuming frame drifting like a speck against the vast darkness of space. The thing, whatever it was, that had erased entire warships had vanished, but its presence still lingered in the air, like the scent of smoke after a raging fire. "High Commander," Torvek whispered, his voice barely steady, "the fleet has successfully retreated. Our ships have re-entered slipspace. We are the last remaining vessel in the sector." Zalvorek could barely process the words. His forces had fled, run, from a single human ship. The shame burned inside him, but beneath it, something else festered. Fear. On the screen, Kane leaned forward again, his expression unreadable. "Good," the human said. "You made the right choice." Zalvorek bared his fangs, his pride screaming for him to lash out, to reclaim even a shred of dignity. You think this is over?" His voice was a low snarl. "You have no idea what the Dominion is capable of. We will—" Kane held up a single finger. "Don't," he interrupted. His voice was quiet, but something about it made the entire command bridge go still. Zalvorek swallowed hard. "You're thinking about revenge," Kane continued, "about rallying a bigger fleet, maybe bringing some of those fancy doomsday weapons you lizards like to hoard." He leaned in, and for the first time, his smirk was completely gone. "You won't." Zalvorek's mandibles twitched. "You cannot stop the Dominion." Kane exhaled. "You're right," he admitted. "We can't stop an empire. We can't hold off the full force of your entire war machine." Then, his lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "But we don't have to." Zalvorek frowned. "What do you mean?" Kane's gaze darkened. "See, Commander, the thing about humanity is, we don't need numbers. We don't need the biggest fleet. We don't need planetary defenses." His voice lowered, and every Zortharian officer listening felt an instinctual chill creep down their spines. "We just need one ship." Zalvorek's twin hearts skipped a beat. "We don't fight like the others you've conquered," Kane continued, his voice smooth and calm, but carrying the weight of an unspoken threat. "We don't march in formation and wait for our turn to die." He gestured lazily to his own vessel. "This little rust bucket? Just one of many. We've got thousands of these, maybe tens of thousands. Some of them even have worse surprises than this one." He tilted his head. "So, if you decide to come back? If you think we're just some backwater species waiting to be conquered?" Kane's voice dropped to a whisper, but the weight behind his words was heavier than any fleet. "We will be waiting." Zalvorek could hardly breathe. His mind raced through possibilities. Could this be a bluff? An illusion? Some form of psychological warfare? But the truth gnawed at him. The Dominion had ruled unchallenged for centuries, crushing civilizations with sheer numbers, overwhelming them with technological superiority. But the humans were different. They didn't rely on fleets. They didn't engage in wars of attrition. They found weaknesses, exploited them. And worst of all, they seemed to enjoy it. Zalvorek clenched his fists, fury and humiliation roiling in his gut. He wanted to scream, to retaliate, to do something. But he knew that any move against these creatures would only lead to catastrophe. Kane studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Glad we understand each other." With that, the screen cut to black. The Blackbird tilted slightly, as if giving a lazy salute. Then, without a sound, it blinked out of existence. Zalvorek remained seated in stunned silence. His bridge crew stood frozen, waiting for their commander to say something. Anything. Torvek swallowed hard. "Orders, High Commander?" Zalvorek's claws dug into his armrests. "Set course for home," he muttered. Torvek hesitated. "And what will we tell the Dominion?" Zalvorek closed his eyes. He thought of the ships that had vanished, the force that had unraveled reality itself, the humans' final words. His stomach twisted as he realized the true extent of what had just happened. The Dominion had just encountered something it did not understand. And for the first time in its long, ruthless history, it had backed down. The journey back to Zortharian space was silent. The command bridge, once a place of dominance and certainty, now felt suffocating, like a tomb. No one spoke. No one dared. High Commander Zalvorek sat motionless in his chair, his mind running through 1,000 scenarios, 1,000 excuses, 1,000 lies he could tell the Dominion to explain what had happened. But no matter how he twisted the truth, one fact remained. They had been defeated, not in battle, not through firepower or strategy, but by something far worse, something the Dominion had never encountered before. A human had made them afraid. The bridge remained eerily still as the ship neared Dominion-controlled space. The massive capital world of Zalthoria loomed ahead, its planetary defenses scanning the returning flagship with curiosity. They expected a report of another conquest, another victory. They would receive neither. Torvek finally broke the silence. His voice was quiet, hesitant. "High Commander," he said, his words careful, "what shall we tell the High Council?" Zalvorek exhaled slowly. The truth? That a single human ship had dismantled their fleet without firing a shot? That their greatest warships had simply ceased to exist? That the humans had weapons even the Dominion could not understand? Number, he would not deliver such a humiliating defeat to the High Council. It would not only be the end of his career, it would send shockwaves through the Dominion itself. They had ruled through fear for centuries. If the Council learned that they had been the ones to feel fear, the Dominion might never recover. "Tell them." Zalvorek's voice was slow, measured, as he chose his words carefully. "Tell them the humans possess an unknown weapon, one that makes continued aggression unwise." Torvek's mandibles twitched in discomfort. Unwise? Zalvorek's claws flexed, his pride screaming at him to say something else, to deny the truth, to fight back. But Kane's words still echoed in his head. "We will be waiting." A chill ran through him. "Yes," he said at last, his voice hollow. "Tell them Earth is off limits." Torvek stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. The order was relayed, sent through encrypted channels straight to the Dominion's highest authorities. Zalvorek closed his eyes. Earth was off limits, not by treaty, not by surrender, by fear. 6 months later. Far beyond the Dominion's borders, deep in human-controlled space, Captain Elias Kane sat in a dimly lit bar, sipping at a glass of something that burned on the way down. He had expected to be called in for a debriefing after the incident with the Zortharians. Expected to be interrogated, studied, maybe even locked away for what he'd done. Instead, he'd been given something far more surprising. A promotion. A quiet one, of course. Nothing official. But word had spread through the right channels. High-ranking officials in humanity's black-budget operations had taken notice, and soon after, Kane had received an offer, not to lead a fleet, not to command an army, but to do what he did best. One ship. He smirked, swirling the drink in his hand. That was all it took. The Dominion had expected a war. Instead, they'd been given a lesson, and now? Now humanity had a very special fleet, thousands of ships scattered across the galaxy. Some old, some new, some barely holding together with rust and duct tape. But each one carrying a pilot who understood the game. A game the rest of the galaxy hadn't even realized they were playing. Kane took another sip, then leaned back in his chair, a slow grin spreading across his face. The Dominion wouldn't be coming back. Not today. Maybe not ever. Because somewhere out there, in the dark and endless void, a human ship was always waiting. The Dominion may have left Earth alone, for now, but Zalvorek knew the High Council would not let the matter rest forever. The Zortharian Dominion had never suffered a defeat like this before. Even though he had reported the truth in the most controlled manner possible, whispers had begun to spread. A single human ship had forced the withdrawal of an entire armada. The mere thought of it gnawed at him. As the weeks passed, the pressure from the High Council increased. Demands for more information, for intelligence reports, for a way to counter the humans' impossible weapon. But the problem wasn't just the weapon. It was them. They fought differently, thought differently. They didn't believe in grand displays of power or noble duels between fleets. They were scavengers, tricksters, ghosts in the dark. And now they knew the Dominion was afraid. Kane sat across from a man whose presence radiated quiet authority. Director Cole of ONI, the Office of Naval Intelligence. The kind of man who rarely showed his face in public, who operated in the shadows behind human expansion. Kane had seen the type before, but today was different. "You did something remarkable, Captain," Cole said, his voice calm but weighted. "The Dominion has officially withdrawn from Earth's sector. No probes, no spies, no military buildup at our borders. They're not just retreating." He leaned forward. "They're scared." Kane took a sip of his drink. "Good. Let's keep it that way." Cole studied him for a moment, then slid a datapad across the table. "What if I told you we could do more than that?" Kane raised an eyebrow. Cole tapped the screen. A star map flickered to life. "The Dominion is massive, but it isn't unshakable," Cole explained. "Their empire survives because they project strength. They rule through intimidation, not loyalty." A new set of markers appeared, some in Dominion space, others on the edges of human-controlled systems. "We've been in contact with certain interested parties inside their territory, rebellions, dissidents, species that hate being under Zortharian rule." Kane's eyes flicked over the map. "You want me to stir the pot?" Cole smiled slightly. "More than that, I want you to do exactly what you did at Earth, but not once." He gestured to the stars. "Everywhere." Kane chuckled. "You want me to make the whole damn Dominion afraid of the dark?" "Yes," Cole said simply. Kane sat back, considering. One ship, that's all it took. One ship playing by a different set of rules. His grin widened. "Sounds like a hell of a job." High Commander Zalvorek stood before the High Council, his posture rigid. The chamber was vast, filled with towering pillars of glowing energy. The councilors sat in a half-circle around him, their elongated faces locked in expressions of disapproval. "This is unacceptable," one of them hissed. "You fled from one ship?" Zalvorek's mandibles tightened. "I retreated to preserve the fleet. Had we stayed, we would have suffered total annihilation." Another councilor scoffed. "We are the Dominion. We do not flee from inferior species." Zalvorek stepped forward, his voice rising. "They are not inferior." The room fell silent. The words felt like acid on his tongue, but he could not deny them. "The humans do not fight like the others we have conquered," Zalvorek continued. "They do not throw fleets at us in desperate, doomed attempts. They think differently, They fight differently." He took a breath. "And they have weapons we do not understand. That should concern you all." The council remained still. Then the High Chancellor, an ancient and scarred Zortharian, leaned forward. His reptilian eyes were piercing. "You fear them," he said. Not a question. A statement. Zalvorek did not answer. The High Chancellor studied him for a long moment. Then he turned to the others. "Begin the preparations. We must learn everything there is to know about these humans." A pause. "And if they truly are a threat," his eyes gleamed, "we will burn their world to ash." Kane's blackbird drifted in the shadow of a gas giant, watching. The Dominion fleet ahead of him, 10 ships strong, was escorting a supply convoy. A perfect target. Kane exhaled, his fingers resting lightly on the controls. This wasn't Earth. There would be no diplomacy here. Just a lesson. One ship. One ghost in the dark. And by the time the Dominion realized what had happened, it would already be too late. The Dominion war convoy moved in perfect formation, 10 warships flanking 3 massive supply carriers. Their engines burned bright as they cut through space, confident in their overwhelming firepower. They had no idea they were being watched. Captain Elias Kane sat in the dim cockpit of the Blackbird, eyes locked on the targeting readout. His ship, patched together from stolen parts and old tech, barely even registered on Dominion scanners. That was the point. The Zortharians had built their empire by crushing enemies before they could resist. Kane was about to introduce them to an enemy they couldn't fight. "All right, let's see how well you handle the unknown," he muttered. He flicked a switch. The lights on his ship flickered as the experimental device spun up. Humanity's newest trick, an evolution of the technology that had erased the Dominion fleet before. This wasn't about destruction. This was about fear. The space around the Blackbird rippled, warping like a mirage. Then Kane activated the signal jammer. Instantly, the Dominion fleet's comms died. On board the Dominion flagship, alarms shrieked. "Hi, Captain, we're under electronic attack," a Zortharian officer shouted. "Source?" "Unknown. There's no ship on sensors, but something is here." Then, the first warship vanished. Not exploded, not destroyed, just gone. Panic spread like wildfire. The Dominion fleet broke formation, scanning wildly for a threat they couldn't see. Kane grinned. Works every time. He didn't need to destroy the convoy. He just needed them to run. And run they did. Within minutes, the entire Dominion escort was in full retreat, warships jumping to slip space, abandoning their precious supply carriers in sheer primal terror. The supply ships drifted, unprotected, helpless. Kane opened his communications. "This is the Blackbird to Rebel Command. Your supplies have been delivered." A voice crackled through the speakers. "Holy hell, Kane. That worked?" Kane smirked. "Told you, they don't need to lose a war." His fingers tapped the dashboard. "They just need to believe they've already lost." Back on Zalthoria, the High Chancellor paced. The reports were disturbing. Supply convoys were vanishing. Military patrols were being driven away by phantoms. Entire sectors had fallen into panic. The humans weren't attacking like a traditional enemy. They weren't launching invasions or sieging planets. They were hunting fear itself. "Find the humans responsible," the High Chancellor growled. "Find them and end them." Zalvorek, standing stiffly nearby, exhaled slowly. "That will not be easy, Chancellor." The old ruler's eyes narrowed. "Why?" Zalvorek hesitated. Then finally he said the words he had dreaded since the retreat from Earth. "Because they have already won." The chamber went deathly silent. Zalvorek's voice remained steady. "The humans are not fighting for territory. They are not fighting to win battles. They are fighting to make us afraid. He looked around at the other counselors, their expressions dark. And they have succeeded. Kane landed the Blackbird on a hidden rebel outpost, stepping down onto the rough metal platform. A group of resistance fighters greeted him, their eyes filled with something he rarely saw in alien species under Dominion rule. Hope. You did it, their leader, a grizzled reptilian named Torin, said, shaking his head in disbelief. The Dominion is in disarray. They don't know how to fight this kind of war. Kane smiled. Then let's make sure they never learn. Torin handed him a new datapad, filled with mission reports and targets. The Dominion is already pulling resources from their core systems to secure the outer colonies, Torin explained. They're stretched thin. If we push harder, we might... A warning siren blared. One of the rebels ran in. Sir, we have incoming ships. Kane's smile faded. The Dominion had found them. And this time, they weren't running. The warning siren howled across the rebel outpost as Kane sprinted to the nearest terminal. The display flickered to life, revealing a cluster of incoming ships dropping from slip space. Dominion warships. Fast ones. How the hell did they find us? Torin growled, gripping his sidearm. Kane's mind raced. The Dominion was paranoid now. He had expected them to send scouts, maybe a few patrols to search the system. But this wasn't a search party. It was an execution squad. Doesn't matter, Kane said, already moving. We need to be gone 5 minutes ago. Torin turned to his people. Get to the transports now. The rebels scattered, scrambling to load supplies and weapons onto their ships. Outside, the sky cracked open as the Dominion fleet descended. Sleek, blade-like ships cut through the atmosphere, their weapons glowing a sickly green. The Dominion had learned something. They weren't waiting. They weren't sending messages. They were here to kill. Kane sprinted back towards the Blackbird, his mind calculating a way out. His ship was fast, stealthy, but against a full Dominion strike force, even he didn't like his odds. A thunderous boom shook the ground as the first Dominion barrage hit. Explosions tore through the outpost, sending debris and bodies flying. Move! Move! Torin shouted, shoving his people towards their transports. Kane hit the cockpit of the Blackbird and powered it up. The engines roared as he flicked through emergency startup procedures, skipping half the safety checks. A rebel ship tried to launch, only to be torn apart mid-air by Dominion fighters. Kane cursed. No time. He activated his comms. Torin, tell your people to scatter. Single large targets won't make it, but small ones might. Torin hesitated, then growled. You heard him. Break up and run. One by one, the rebel ships began launching, darting in different directions. The Dominion opened fire, trying to track them all at once. Kane grabbed the flight controls and yanked the Blackbird into a tight roll, dodging a burst of energy fire. He twisted through the chaos, heading straight for the upper atmosphere. A Dominion fighter locked onto him. The targeting alarm screamed. Kane's jaw tightened. All right, let's see if this still works. He flipped a switch. The Blackbird's hull flickered, distorting like a heat mirage. The fighter's weapons discharged, right into empty space. The Blackbird was already gone. High above the battlefield, aboard the Dominion warship Vorax Claw, a pair of slitted eyes watched the conflict unfold. High Commander Tor Zanak, a veteran of 100 campaigns, clicked his mandibles in satisfaction. The humans were clever, dangerous, but not invincible. They fight like ghosts, one of his officers murmured, slipping in and out of battle, never engaging directly. Torzanak let out a low, rumbling laugh. Then let us exterminate the ghosts. He gestured toward the battlefield below. Begin the purge. The officer hesitated. Sir, there are still prisoners planetside. Should we? Torzanak's eyes flashed. Burn it all. A moment later, Dominion warships unleashed their true weapon, a planetary sterilization beam. The rebel base, the surrounding landscape, everything was engulfed in a blinding inferno. The Blackbird drifted in high orbit, sensors tracking the devastation below. Kane's hands clenched into fists as he watched the rebel base vanish beneath the Dominion's fury. He had seen war before. He had seen cruelty. But this was something else. Torin's last transmission had cut out mid-sentence. Kane didn't know if his friend had made it out. Didn't know if anyone had. His ship's systems beeped, tracking the Dominion fleet as it prepared to leave. They hadn't stayed to loot. They hadn't stayed to gloat. They had burned everything and moved on. Kane exhaled slowly, his rage simmering beneath the surface. They wanted to play that kind of war? Fine. He would teach them what true terror looked like. The Blackbird drifted through space, its pilot silent. Kane's hands rested on the controls, but he wasn't flying. Not yet. He was watching the Dominion fleet vanish into slipspace, leaving nothing behind but scorched earth and ash. Torin, the rebels, the outpost, gone. For a long time, he sat there, staring at the dead world below. Then, without a word, he turned the ship and set course for the nearest rebel hideout. The Dominion had made their move. Now it was his turn. 2 weeks later, the Dominion's logistics network was in chaos. Fuel depots detonated without warning. Military supply routes collapsed. Communication relays mysteriously failed. Entire warships disappeared without a trace. The Dominion High Council was in a panic. "This is unacceptable," one of the counselors hissed. "How does an empire of our magnitude suffer at the hands of one man?" Zalvorek sat in silence. He knew the answer. It wasn't about the damage Kane was causing. It was about the fear. The Dominion relied on its reputation, on its enemies believing that resistance was useless. Now they had an enemy who refused to play by the rules. And worse, others were watching. Dissident groups, rebellions, entire species that had once cowered under Dominion rule. They were seeing the cracks, and some were starting to think, maybe the Dominion wasn't invincible after all. Zalvorek stood suddenly, turning to the High Chancellor. "If we do not eliminate this human, our empire will fall." The High Chancellor's reptilian eyes narrowed. "Then find him. Kill him." Zalvorek's voice was ice-cold. "Oh, I intend to." Kane knew the Dominion would eventually stop running and start fighting back. They had to. The assassins came first. Silent killers with cloaked ships and poison-tipped blades. Kane left their corpses floating in the void. Then came the bounty hunters, mercenaries from across the galaxy, eager to claim the reward on his head. He made examples of them. But then came Zalvorek himself. The High Commander wasn't just another Dominion officer. He was a predator, smart, relentless, and disciplined, and he had set a trap. Kane only realized it when his ship's systems locked up mid-flight. The Blackbird shuddered as some kind of Dominion gravity weapon ripped him out of slipspace. An entire fleet waited for him. Dozens of warships, hundreds of fighters. Kane's usual tricks wouldn't work here. No stealth, no running, just him and an armada. His lips curled into a smirk. "All right," he muttered. "Let's see how much hell one human can raise." The Dominion ships opened fire. Kane's ship rolled, dodging the first barrage, but he knew he was outmatched. So he did the only thing that made sense. He went straight for the flagship. Dodging and weaving through enemy fire, he pushed the Blackbird into a full-speed assault run. The Dominion fighters scrambled to keep up. Kane flicked a switch. The Blackbird's experimental quantum weapon spun to life. Only this time, it wasn't set to erase ships. It was set to unravel the laws of physics themselves. The space around the Dominion fleet twisted. Suddenly, ships were and weren't at the same time. Some folded in on themselves. Others drifted dead in space, their crews lost to madness. Panic tore through the Dominion ranks, and then Kane boarded Zalvorek's flagship. The halls of the Dominion warship were eerily silent. Kane moved like a shadow, his weapon in hand, and then, at the heart of the ship, he found him. Zalvorek stood tall, his reptilian form towering over Kane, his twin blades drawn. "This ends today, human," he growled. Kane rolled his shoulders. "Yeah," he agreed. "It does." The fight was brutal, fast, deadly. Zalvorek was a trained warrior, his blades a blur. Kane fought dirty. Quick strikes, misdirection, anything to gain an edge. Blades clashed. Blood spilled. Then, finally, Kane drove his knife into Zalvorek's chest. The High Commander staggered, eyes wide with disbelief. Kane leaned in. "That fear you feel?" he whispered. "That's what your empire is built on." He twisted the knife. "And that's why it's going to fall." Zalvorek slumped to the floor, his reign of terror ending in silence. With Zalvorek dead and the Dominion fleet in chaos, the rest of the rebellion struck. System by system, the Dominion collapsed. Worlds that had once lived in fear rose up. Fleets that had once crushed opposition fled. And then, finally, the High Chancellor himself was forced to surrender. The Dominion was no more. And Kane? Kane disappeared. Some say he retired. Others say he still roams the stars, a ghost in the void, waiting for the next tyrant foolish enough to rise. But one thing is certain. The legend of the one human ship that changed everything will never be forgotten.